Hello, all. Thanks for joining us on this another episode of Capisar Podcast. Before getting into the crux of this episode, I have one small announcement to make, which is basically about the consulting skills program that we have for Capisar that is going to be taking place from September 5th of 2025 to September 7th of 2025. So if you want more information about this, please go to capisar.org, which is Capisar's website, or you can send an email at info@capisar.org. And if you also don't want to miss further updates from Capisar, I suggest you go ahead and subscribe to their newsletter so that you always receive important updates such as this on your email. With that, I think we will jump into the subject matter of today. So I have two amazing astrologers, Gray Crawford and S.J. Anderson, both of whom whose work I've known and I follow very closely and I enjoy. And the topic for today is like bringing together or blending modern and traditional astrology. So in order to kind of understand the blending of modern and traditional astrology, we need to see and acknowledge that there are two different approaches and there is a reconciliation that is actually needed. And this is also kind of an ongoing dialogue in the astrological community, and some people agree that modern astrology should be practiced, and some people are pure hardcore traditionalists. But there are some people who are unique that kind of bring in the elements of both modern and traditional astrology, which is quite refreshing. So I think we are planning to do 2 episodes, but I think we'll start with addressing how astrology kind of philosophically evolved from the Hellenistic tradition until the modern era, which is largely based on psychological and archetypal frameworks that pretty much shaped the astrological practice of the entire 20th century. So the idea is to see why it doesn't have to be traditional versus modern, but it can be traditional with modern or traditional and modern. So in order to find out how it can be traditional and modern, we need to kind of bring out some distinctions that matter to astrologers today in their practice. And for that purpose, I'm really delighted to have S.J. Anderson and Gray Crawford today. Thank you so much, S.J. and Gray, for joining me today. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, we're really excited about this conversation.
Likewise, me too. Thanks for having me today, and great to be with you both.
Thank you. So one of those things that I straight away want to start is by talking about what is traditional astrology and what is modern astrology, just from a very aerial or a bird's eye view, just to give some insights into where this conversation is headed. So I think anyone can go ahead to present your views about what is traditional and what is modern, and part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with the both of you is something that I need to also mention. Having followed both your work for quite a long time, it makes it very evident that both of you kind of pick the best from both worlds and not necessarily averse to any one tradition. So I watched SJ's videos and I also watched your videos, and one of those things that kind of struck me is that, Gray, you presented the Cancer ingress in one of your YouTube videos, and it's not so different from what a traditional astrologer would present, except that you had this Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and SJ has this really unique perspective of bringing together some spiritual elements and psychological elements along with the traditional astrology. I have not seen any video where he doesn't really touch upon the ancient techniques. So he mentions or quotes that in the ancient tradition, this is what it meant, and so on. So I thought, since you both have this inherent practice of blending both of these. So I thought it will be really valuable for the audience to listen to your perspective. So what is traditional astrology and what is modern astrology in your perspective? Anyone can go first.
It makes me think about lineage is the main thing. And I think one of the things that gets really tricky when we start defining what is traditional astrology is that there are many different lineages. But I think for me, I feel like traditional astrology means you are part of a traditional lineage. And that could be a traditional lineage going back many, countless generations in India, where you have like a very living, thriving tradition that people can, I don't even know how far back some families can go, but they can go really far back where there's living lineage passed down to generation. Other lineages have been disconnected across time, but there's still this attempt to go back to texts, whether that's from 200 BC or Hellenistic era, and reconstruct that. Or if people are wanting to practice more of like medieval astrology or the great Islamic kind of golden era, Abu Mashar. Some people really like to work within the lineage of William Lilly, who was synthesizing a lot of the tradition and presenting that through the English language. And then what's interesting about that, though, is then what about lineages that develop in the 19th century or the early 20th century? Let's say like Dean Ridhar. People wouldn't say that's a traditional lineage, I don't think, but that's kind of, Ridhar then got his own kind of lineage in a way, but that's not really considered traditional. I mean, I think in a lot of ways there is a thing with the planets. So, I mean, I think one thing, typically the traditional astrology lineages are often only working with the visible planets. And that's one way people typically talk about it, I guess, is another pretty different reason. And then there's certainly all sorts of different philosophical reasons. But again, when I think about it, there's these different lineages all have their own different cosmological philosophical orientation as well. So I think it's hard to really define, like, I think sometimes people get a little bit too simplistic, like I'm a traditional astrologer, when that's actually like, that's not really actually saying anything besides you're seeing yourself as part of a lineage, I think.
Cool. So yeah, I think we'll hear from SJ as well.
Yeah, I think I like that, Gray, and I like some of the stuff you're going into there for sure. My initial thought was text. I mean, a lot of what I think I consider to be defined as so-called traditional, in the more commonly way that term is used to define the astrological world we're in right now, is that it has to do with the types of techniques, or really the types of texts people are inspired by or quoting from or studying as they then build out their astrologies, which are contemporary. One thing I'll say here, and I don't want to get too far off on this, but it's an important part of how I think about it, is simply that, I think history is alive. It lives in the present, and it's kind of like all of this stuff is living now. So when we talk about what traditional astrology is, but in some ways what we're really saying is how we define it contemporaneously, and that's changing all the time. And so if you go back like 30 years and you say traditional astrology, I don't think it quite had the connotations that it has today, because new texts have come online. Certain translations are way more popular and have been propagated into the minds of living and practicing astrologers more so than in like 1980. It would have been probably more like William Lilly, or what's the other guy from the UK, Gladstone, or there's another one, kind of a few of these famous guys whose texts were available in English, And after about 80 and in the 90s, you get the Project Hindsight and a bunch of these new translations where you're building out whole new technique sets that didn't exist, a decade earlier. And so you have new traditional astrology in a way, which is almost paradoxical, you might say. So I think it behooves us to think about it kind of like how we are keeping these things alive through our discourse and through what we study, the texts we use, the texts we're quoting from, to make our astrology in real time. And so from that definition, when I see the current scene, my view of traditional astrology would be like, okay, all my friends are reading this text and they're practicing. Abu Mashar is a huge one right now. A lot of people, kind of center him. Of course, the William Lilly schools, as you mentioned, Gray, big centering on that text out of Britain. And then the American school, they say, the Brennan, Hand, Project Hindsight tradition, which is more of a Hellenistic focused text.
Yeah.
Textually. So that's kind of how I think about it, as text is the first word that I think about. And real quick, one other thought there is that what that means is that it also helps us define all of the other currently extant streams, because like evolutionary astrology, they have their own text. I mean, they're reading Stephen Forrest's book. What is it? The Living Sky, I think, or the big one that, he's got a bunch of them. There's the other evolutionary astrologer that's really popular that has a whole textual tradition. His books are really big. You guys know who he is. I can't think of him right now.
Jeff Green.
Jeff Green, the cigarette smoking kind of Uranian character. But so I'll leave it with that. But that's my kind of some of my initial thinking here about how to sift through this definitionally.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about the text, and because that is the lineage, and that's what's interesting now is. Unlike some other, like I mentioned, like in India, where there's people passing stuff down, we're in this point where we're going back essentially to all these different texts, which you're right, they are still alive, and a lot of these texts, they really do have this living quality. I always remember for the first time getting the William Lilly text, and even this is like this printed copy, it felt like this magical object in a way, as well as like Ficino, or when I was able to finally get the Ben Dyke's Abu Mashar Great Introduction, like all these texts, there's still this real living power. You can feel that something's being transmitted through it. And that's what's interesting, is we are synthesizing all these different texts, and somebody could be working today that's drawing from all these seemingly disparate lineages and texts and just like putting something together out of that. I mean, but yeah, that's kind of where we are right now. It's a big synthesis of things happening.
Yeah, but I think I agree with both of you. There is no real disagreement or points of challenge here, because I come from India, and my own tradition or foundation is Indian astrology, and I have a family lineage that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And there is also textual lineage, as Jay mentioned. And so it is necessary for us to kind of go back and read the texts that were, that survived the test of times. And I think one of the most interesting things in the Western world that is happening is that while the Indian tradition had this forward-moving, tradition or some kind of a growth because of its uninterrupted astrological practice, the Western world kind of pretty much lost it somewhere for about 150 years. And then there is this newfound resurgence for the traditional texts because of the translation projects. So, and the greatest opportunities that we as astrologers in current times have is to have access to both these materials and understand how different and also how alike they are in many ways. Because in going further in this discussion, I think the important thing that we need to discuss is the philosophical foundations. So starting with modern astrology and then going back, just like how the Western tradition is kind of flourishing now. As far as I understand, astrology kind of died out, not necessarily completely died, but the practice was much more diluted or sparse in Europe by late 1700s and 1800s. So, and then by the late 1800s, we had some astrologers in the Western world who came up producing this newfound form of humanistic or esoteric, or maybe even later it was called as a psychological form of astrology. And that turned out to be the actual foundation for the next 100 years or so. And then the better part of 20th century pretty much had the psychological practice or humanistic practice pioneered by, I think, Mark Edmund Jones or Dan Rudyard, the most amazing thinker of the 20th century. And then everyone kind of branched out from these lineages. There was Alice Bailey, there was Alan Oken, there was, I had a conversation with Melanie Reinhardt last week. She is also part of the tradition. She learned pretty much from Dan Rudyard's texts. And then how many people have branched out from Melanie, and how many people have branched out from Alan Oken? Alan Oken mentioned in one of his interviews with Chris Brennan saying that he studied with Isabel Hickey, and there is a kind of a lineage for Isabel Hickey. So all this kind of goes back to this New Age movement or theological movement that kind of started somewhere in the mid or late 19th century, which kind of formed the philosophical foundations of the Western astrology. But I feel it is more of the approach to astrology in terms of how we communicate and practice with the clients. So I know that Dan Rudyard straight away mentioned that there is very less usage in practicing astrology that is already 2000 years old. So we need to kind of revive or revamp the astrological tradition as it is necessary in contemporary times. So, but still, if we go back and see, I just feel like there is much less difference. But I will kind of say that the reason why I feel there is much less difference is that we focused more on the inner self of a human being rather than the external circumstances. And we started doing client sessions in a way that was helping the person to develop from an internal perspective. So prediction was pretty much, I don't know if it was there, but I would think it was much less in the modern psychological or Jungian astrology. So I think, Gray, you are much more proficient in talking about the facets of Jungian astrology and what it brings to the modern astrological tradition, how it kind of supports some traditional astrologers who are pretty much interested in Jungian philosophy or any other humanistic methods.
Yeah, well, that's Melanie Reinhardt's a great example. She's one of my favorite all-time astrologers, and definitely has been a big influence. And she's a good example of somebody that became interested in the tradition and has a traditional astrology interest, but then also she has a very strong influence from Rudyard that's absolutely there. And she also was, we discover this body of this strange object that was named Chiron that somehow comes in from perhaps the Kuiper belt. We don't even know what it is, and it has like rings, and it's like weaving in between the orbits of Saturn and Uranus. And she goes in and just really goes hard on researching this really thoroughly, pays attention to all these synchronicities, puts out work on this, and then goes into these objects start being called centaurs, and she goes on to start exploring all of them and putting this together. So she's a really interesting example of somebody that's worked, but you can tell when you listen to her, she's interested in the tradition. Really, my primary lineage teacher that I've worked with more personally is Demetra George, who, though, at the same time, you read Demetra has a huge influence also from Rudyard. You read a lot of her early work. You can see, because I think Esther, you also like Rudyard. I've heard you say, and you also, we all three of me, you, and Rudyard all have Mercury and Pisces. That might be part of it, but. When I was learning astrology, I was not big on the internet, so I was always just kind of going to bookstores, and I was completely ignorant and unaware of the traditional revival that was going on. And Rudyard's writing always spoke to me. And I do think, even though people can argue with different things Rudyard does, I think he really made an effort. There's definitely some traditional sort of Neoplatonic, there's older philosophical ideas and conceptions he has that he's bringing to it. And you can see he's really working through, there's a lot he really actually figured out pretty well that's actually, I feel you can go back to consistency. And then, for example, Carl Jung, there's a difference too with Carl Jung and the way I'll see people criticize Carl Jung at times. But I've never really heard someone when I've heard people criticize him and some of his ideas, I've never fully understood when the person's talking about that they actually understand Carl Jung completely. And there's a lot of Jungians that people would say aren't representing Carl Jung's work accurately. And I don't think a lot of the way Jung was brought into astrology at times, I'm not sure if he would totally agree with it, because there's a difference sometimes between Jungian thought and what people saying their Jungians are doing versus sometimes what Carl Jung's actual material was doing and saying, and what he might have really thought. But again, Carl Jung, what was he doing? He was reading Greek. He was reading Latin. You read Carl Jung, he's quoting Maternus. He's talking about what Firmicus Maternus says about the moon, and it's really accurate, and it is in his books talking. He was reading ancient text and pulling the tradition forward, and he was very influential with ideas like Aeon and looking at perhaps we're heading towards an age of Aquarius, although he did not see the age of Aquarius at all in this positive light, really. He thought it was like this confrontation with evil, and we could like possibly just destroy ourselves, which clearly is where we're heading with things. But yeah, I think though the ideas that come in and the importance of the unconscious, although the more you look into that, what is Jung really talking about? He's talking about the daimon. He's really going back to these old ancient ideas, and he has his own experience, of going into the underworld, interacting with all these spirits and daimons, and then he is creating scientific language. He's trying to communicate it in a psychological way that people will accept and understand. But there actually is quite a bit of, this is one of the ways that I see that some of the overlap is there are some overlapping ideas here. He's also pulling forward alchemy and bringing that into this context of how we can understand ourselves. And so this ability to understand yourself and participate in your destiny, and also the importance of the consciousness then that you're cultivating, the awareness you're bringing into the person you're working with, and how that can help start changing and shaping their life, as well as the consciousness of an astrologer that you're bringing into the interpretation and the choices you're making, the responsibility that holds. I think this is also a way it starts coming in with somebody like Jeffrey Cornelius, who comes in later and is really challenging a lot of these ideas, based upon even the way Rudyard, one of the things I love about Cornelius, he points out how Rudyard is essentially doing the same thing as Ptolemy. We're really focused on this moment of the birth, the moment of the birth chart, and this is like saying everything is going to happen. Cornelius is bringing this much more, questioning this and bringing up this process of divination, and how so I think one of the things, there is a great importance, I think, of this ability to help people with that inner life. And what's come back really strong now is we lost a lot of these techniques that were really good at prediction in the America, the United States of America tradition, whatever that's called. And you will see people, and I don't think it's a totally bad perspective. Philosophically, there are astrologers. I've heard Rick Levine, for example, say something similar to this, that he doesn't think he should make a prediction. I hope I'm not misquoting him there, but I've heard him essentially say something like that in a talk before. Even if you can make a prediction or to tell someone what to do, there is a philosophical framework someone could bring to this, that's not the role, that you should be more counseling them on their own inner choices and helping them, empower them to make better choices. But we do have all these techniques now that have come back that are very predictive and can really show that capacity of astrology to help pinpoint these phases of someone's life and when things are going to happen. So I think what's really important to me with all of this is to cultivate more of this, the consciousness that we're bringing into these techniques and how are we using them, and to also think more about what is the cosmological philosophical framework you have. So there are some people that think everything is completely predetermined. There are other people that don't, and there's ways to think about. You can say there could be different layers of fate and determinism operating, which to me personally does not mean that everything is actually completely predetermined. I think saying everything's completely predetermined is a pretty strong statement that I actually personally I've never been able to agree with completely. And but that doesn't mean that everything is up to you and you can just do whatever you want. Sorry, I feel like maybe SJ, you want to say something? So I'm not sure if I'm losing this.
He is going to have his say. There is no doubt about it. So please carry on. It's going on beautifully.
Yeah. Do you have anything, SJ, you'd want to add in there? Yeah.
Tons. Yeah. It's great to hear you say everything that you said there. I mean, yeah, a lot that you raised, a lot that you raised. I think I'm just going to kind of flow here and speak to some of the stuff. And first, I wanted to say, yeah, you bring up Jung. Fascinating. One of the things I've always loved about his work is specifically on synastry. He's even, I think, if I'm correct, and I'm like 95% sure it's in the book that Green translated. That's the biggest, Liz Green, right? She's got these books around Jung, the new ones.
Liz Green did a lot of work doing Jungian stuff, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But in those books, I think it's like a collection of his writings on astrology. He basically did a scientific analysis of Ptolemy's synastry model. And it was clear he's reading Ptolemy, because the idea in Ptolemy is that the masculine moon and the feminine sun are the two points that you look at in the comparison chart, and you want to see if there is a aspect effectively. Like that's the top layer technique. It's also in Dorotheus. And so Jung then does a science experiment where he's got all these clients and he confirms it statistically. I think it's that the sextile between the feminine moon, or the feminine sun, and the masculine moon, that sextile, it's like the greatest percentage of marriages. And people can check me on that, but I'm like 95% sure. It's been a while since I've been into that, but I'm pretty certain that that's the conclusion. And so when I saw that, I was like, wow, the idea of an anima and an animus is built into Ptolemy and Dorotheus, where you would look at the opposite gender planet of the gendered person you're going to examine. I mean, that's how ancient some of the Jungian ideas are. And so it's really cool to hear you say that, but even specifically astrologically, I mean, he's pulling from those ancient texts, and then he's kind of proving them. That's not psychological. I mean, that is a nuts and bolts tangible manifestation, your life partner, and where their luminary is. So, he's even doing something that wouldn't be considered like Jungian archetypal humanistic astrology, in the sense of here's a nuts and bolts prediction, this person you're a match with. And so, so there's that, which is, fascinating. Yeah. I mean, you're raising so much here. Let me just kind of trace it back to the beginning, which is the idea we're talking about, lineage, and we're talking about, okay, this is the other thing I remember now. I'm going to say this now because it'll keep coming up. I kind of think that the ancient and the modern at one level, there is very little deviation in the tradition, actually, because, and this is why I love Rudyard, actually, New Mansions for New Men, and the other one that I love so much, the name will come to me here in a second, but he's just delineating planets. There's one where he just writes about the planets, just like Valens in chapter 1, book 1. First thing he does is write about the planets. And New Mansions for New Men, it's just writing about the houses. And then he's got the signs, the pulse of life, the zodiac signs. And so we have the symbol set, what I would call the astrological symbol set, that really is consistent from the beginning. Planet, signs, houses. Now we tweak how we want to talk about those and how they interrelate. But I mean, almost every astrologer is going to have a planets and houses section. I mean, Rhetorius Egyptian goes on for like 60 pages. It's just planets and houses. It's a quite thorough delineation. You pull up, and then even Firmicus has planets and signs, I think, for Saturn and Jupiter. But then you pull up Alan Leo and Astrology for All. It's beautiful, planets and signs, and you can just find your planets and signs. And so there's so much that hasn't changed at all. And even with the philosophic, I was just reading a couple of things in the last week, and I like Ptolemy. He's kind of my favorite because he's like, hey, I admit there's a lot that isn't subject to fate. And he says there's different tiers, and this might match some of what the Vedic cosmology, Aswin, you can tell us here, but isn't there certain names of like the types of karma, and some of the karma you can't avoid, and then there's some lower levels that you can kind of work with? And Ptolemy says as much. He's like, hey, there's certain parts of the life that, we can work with or change our fate, that the planets aren't, making certain outcome. And even Valens, and both Firmicus and Valens, there's sections in their text where they say things like, okay, God creates the planetary clock, and then that determines everything. And then they say, but we have to learn to accept it, and then our lives go better. And so it's almost implied that there's this psychological process that is our job to kind of change our world, or our perception of our charts, so that we can live well or have happiness. And so they're even allowing for kind of a working with the acceptance, you might say, or kind of some sort of spiritual resolution around our individual charts, meaning that if you don't accept it, it goes worse. If you do accept it, it goes better. That seems like choice to me a little bit, and so anyhow, there was one other thing I wanted to say, and I think it's the technique side of it. Some of this astrology is language. I mean, a lot of what we do, this is how I think about it. We produce meaning. That's what astrologers do. We use the symbols, then we use our words to describe the symbols, then we convey through words ideas that hopefully generates meaning in the people that are receiving our words, whether that's clients or our audiences. And little debates around, like, okay, Mark Edmund Jones, I was just reading in the Sabian Symbols in Astrology recently, and he's like, I abandoned the word malefic and benefic. I don't want to go there. And instead, I'm going to assume we can work with all of this to make our lives better. And it's kind of like what Ptolemy's talking about, right? So some of this stuff is even transcending astrological discourse. Like, there's philosophers all throughout the history of human writing debating these exact same things. And so I think, in terms of like how I think about this sometimes, is that we're just another field grappling with this similar question. Is it predetermined? Do we have control? What do we have control over? What may be different about astrology is that we have a specific symbol set, as I said, but like a discourse or a specific way we talk about life through the lens of those symbols. And so that's maybe how we're different than those other philosophic conversations. But I think there's, anyhow, let me see if there's something I can conclude here with, and I'll kick it back to you guys. I think there was one other thing, but, basically I just think it's great to be in this moment in time where we can kind of grapple with, in the present, the stuff that has been grappled with by our, forebears. And these questions are still not answered. I mean, I don't think anyone quite knows, is it predetermined fully, or how much is predetermined versus not. I mean, we get to sit with those questions just like they did, and I guess the final thing I'll say, Gray, I appreciate you talking about clients' work, because that's ultimately where this is most importantly applied. I mean, when you have clients before you, you're trying to help them. And so what is helpful to your clients? That's one way to filter all of this stuff. And I know for me, when I see, like, I don't want to predict the future. I don't think we can. That's kind of where I've sided. I just don't think it's possible. I think what we can do, it's objective that a certain symbol set is active during a certain time. That symbol set evokes meaning. And so we can engage the future by engaging a symbol set. And with a client, so they're psychically engaging certain ideas, linguistic ideas, and maybe spiritual if they're going to take it outside of the reading and like sit with it or something. But to me, that is as much predicting. Then that's like the best we can do predictively, is to work with symbols that, like, for example, Saturn in Aries. Now it's here now. We've got it this summer in the tropical Aries. Saturn is in tropical Aries, but it's going to go back to Pisces. It'll be back in Aries. So we can engage February 2026 through April 2028. We have a lot. We have the ephemeral timing, We have the symbolism of Saturn, the symbolism of Aries. We have the house topics in our individual charts. And now we have some facts on the ground from 25 May through the present with Saturn already in Aries to begin like getting a bunch on our plates to begin kind of sifting through to create meaning. And to me, that is predictive in a way. A lot of times you get things right by doing it like that, but it's not telling a client like, hey, you're going to, this is what I say with my clients a lot. I'll be like, the man in the polka dot tie will walk in at 7:20 a.m. at the cafe that's absurd. I mean, you can't do that in my view. Now, maybe some astrologers can or have skills with that, but to me, it's just try to do it. You're going to fail. I mean, it's just, that's not going to work, so.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I mean, that's the main thing I think when we're talking about all this is how we're actually helping people in our consultation practice. And then there are people that are also interested maybe in writing more or thinking more about mundane astrology or like this kind of universal astrology, which is also kind of going back to this distinction Ptolemy is making. But one of the things I think the thing is, one thing I think about with people getting more and more into these concrete predictive things is even if you could do that, you tell somebody the guy in the polka dot tie is going to walk in at this time and you can tell someone exactly what's going to happen to them. How is that actually even helpful? In some cases, maybe it is, but what's going to be helpful is how you're talking to them and guiding them. And even if, for example, somebody's asking, should I do this? And let's say you can predict that this is going to fail. What they're going to attempt to do is not going to meet their expectations. And then so you tell them, don't do that. But what if their destiny was they actually needed to fail because this leads to this really powerful insight that then creates this thing that even in some cases changes the world, or like brings this great inspiration to all these people. You see this over and over again in actual biographies of people's life stories. And we jump into some of these big time timing techniques, like these different, like with this translation movement we're calling them all the Time Lord techniques. So one of the ones that I use a lot, like zodiacal releasing, for example, there's so many other ones where they call it circumambulation of the bounds or distribution to the bounds or primary directions or ages of man or Ferdari or whatever. One thing I was in a retreat with Demetra George, and something she said that I really agree with, and I was happy to hear her say it, where she was like, sometimes I wonder, what's even the point of doing this with people in a consultation, just from the standpoint that you actually can't know what any of those techniques are saying until the person has really passed away and their entire life story and the full context, because I use them and I think they're helpful. But it doesn't mean when you can't, there's a certain way where these things are speaking to these much larger storylines, and I think you can utilize them in your practice, and people can be giving predictive types of guidance, and that can be helpful. But it totally depends how you're doing that. And we're really opening this whole mystery of destiny and things like that. Something you brought up, SJ, I think was when you brought up Jung's research thing and the sun-moon connection and synastry that he found. Something interesting in Jeffrey Cornelius's Moment of Astrology book I think about a lot is he has a little part talking about this and how what Jung found was he sort of had that idea in his head, so he realized he was kind of looking for that because he knew that idea. And then when he gave the same data to other people, like they were finding different things, and sort of brings up the idea when we're looking for something with just our awareness and consciousness, it starts shaping what's happening. Even with our research findings, when we're trying to be like, we're backing up our astrology with the research we're finding. And that sort of idea about how our consciousness impacts what's going on in reality with our awareness is very applicable to how we work in astrology with the guidance we're giving and how we can help people come into relationship with their own astrology and their own charts. One thing just about this, I just wanted to go into a little bit more. When you're bringing up the old ancient ideas and how that can come through now, one thing it makes me think about a lot is the idea of the world soul, and whether it's through Stoicism or any other strand of thought, when they're thinking, when this idea that the world soul is like the cosmos is this living being, and we're parts within, you know, this larger cosmos, which is this living being. And there's modern scientists right now, like someone like Michael Levin. I don't know if you've heard about him and some of the scientific work he's doing, which is sort of showing, he's sort of proving science. Well, he's doing research studies that are kind of going back to old Platonic ideas and how we're made up of all these different cells and things that are all forming in these ways that have this sort of teleological thing. But if we think about how we're kind of, this idea of like fractals, and if we're all part of this larger living being organism, this starts pulling us into, there's ways where I feel like that idea of the world soul is really powerful and does seem to get to the heart of what's going on, being this living being that might go through its own eternal cycles of birth and rebirth, which we're seeing with all these planetary cycles, you know, especially when there might be like these big massive conjunctions of planets, or we think we're in a time right now based on the astrology that's another big change because of how everything's lining up right now, and where things are going in the next 20 years. But there's something really powerful about that, and I think there's something about when we're blending these things, how does the ancient, you know, come into the present? That was really what a lot of Carl Jung's work, just to bring back to what you're asking about, Aswin, I feel like Jung was very much about making the ancient present, you know, what is these more eternal parts of reality. We're in a time where we don't know for sure, but based upon past things that have happened with some of these planetary cycles, it does go with things like the heliocentric revolution and like our conception of reality totally changing with some kind of massive scientific breakthrough or theory that comes in that changes the way a lot of people are actually thinking about reality. I think that's something like that could happen, and astrology will have to move with that, whatever it is. There's something about, I guess, whatever some of these ancient ideas that can kind of be eternally true, and we can eternally kind of bring in with what's actually happening, whether we're talking about like, I don't know, quantum entanglement, or I don't even understand fully all the different developments, but there's a lot of things going on with a lot of ideas about reality right now that we seem to be really entering a time of, not just with the technological advancement. It seems like a lot of things are happening with this, even on like a reality cosmological perspective, perhaps.
Can I say something here, Aswin? Do you mind if I jump in and just, because I want to just speak right here about the power of astrology in this age of change. It's really been on my mind a lot lately, and it kind of speaks directly to the idea of an ancient astrology or a traditional astrology. And I'm thinking that the ancient astrology actually is the contemporary astrology, because if it is a tradition and it's a chain of symbols or a chain of a knowledge that has been practiced unbroken. I know there was times when some books weren't as popular, but I think it's basically an unbroken tradition. If you go back to the breakthrough of planet science houses, I even think about the zodiac. Let's take it back even to like Babylon and the invention of the zodiac, which is a division of 12 of the solar path as we perceive it, the ecliptic. That alone will not change. You know, I mean, heliocentric or not, that did change when the heliocentric revolution came online, because that's still and I agree with you, Gray, that I think we are on the cusp of some radical stuff based on transiting cycles. There's no doubt about it. I think we can come back to what that is, because I think we all have some ideas about it. But I think astrology can be a great rudder in these times. And the fact that it is an ancient, unbroken symbol set that humans have relied on and fed and participated in continually for many thousands of years. Like, that's not going to go away. I was just thinking about it with the age of AI. It's like, I don't need AI to tell me where Aries, the cusp of Aries is. You know, we have already precision measurements. I think there's debates like it's like a hair a second difference. There's a few different competing measurements for the equinoctial point, the spring equinox, but basically that's not going to change. The zodiac isn't going to change. The Aries season and Taurus season, those aren't going to change unless we have some kind of geophysical event that changes the solar system, which, you know, that would seem pretty out there, but maybe, but assuming that doesn't happen, like astrology can be something we grab onto right now that won't change, right? The symbol, like where are we at right now? Leo season, like Sun in Leo, that's a rich symbol with huge history and a huge depth of meaning that's relevant in this moment. We can talk about it for the next, you know, few weeks, and then we get Sun in Virgo, just as an example. So it's a kind of a life-saving force in my view, and you know, it's ancient. So, and that's in Valens. It's in, you know, the earliest book, Manilius. It's the same stuff, you know. So anyhow, I'm just going to throw it back to you, Aswin, there. But I think it's as you talk, Gray, I'm just inspired to as an astrologer, and feel lucky that we get to be carriers of something that is alive and it likely continues to be alive, you know, in this moment of change we're in.
Okay. It looks like we might need another episode. So, but I don't know where to start and from where to pick, but I'll just kind of throw my own thoughts, because it's difficult not to at this point. That both of you have kind of, you know, planted a lot of things in my mind. So I think so the crux of it, where Gray, you started about how it is important to focus on the internal self through this Jungian idea, and how astrologers like Melanie Reinhardt and also even Demetra George had some of those you know, influences. But so one thing that I always found, and it kept kind of going back, you spoke about Jung talking about daimon, and also the connection between Ptolemy and Dane Rudyard. So I thought there is, in one of the chapters in Astrology of Personality, I think Dane Rudyard talks about the field of consciousness, and Rudyard kind of frames it in such a way that he calls it as one of those internal functions that happens inside us. But still he sees that particular individual, someone who is going through this field of conscious, as a cosmic whole, or the actual cosmic being for whom astrology is done, which is the obvious thing. And that is where the interaction happens. So this human experience and the body has this interaction with their mind, which speaks to how the consciousness, that is the brain or the inner self of a person, keeps evolving from birth to their developmental stages, where probably the person has to go through some form of crisis or various integrations of ideas that they have. And also I think he brings this to light much more in his lunation cycles, where he talks about the solilunar phases, which again talks about the sun moon consciousness, and how each life event kind of contributes to the expansion of this field of consciousness inside us. And he kind of you know, saw it in tandem with the actual consciousness on this nothingness. And there is, I think he implied there is this some form of purposeful integration between the internal and the external, but still it is not a given that these astrologers did not focus on the external, because whatever they did was based on the external, and the external always affects the internal. And that is one thing that I found as very important in terms of this transpersonal orientation of you know, the understanding the planetary archetypes or whatever it is in relation to how a person is behaving based on their own charts or whatever it is. So I think he mentions that birth chart is basically a field of consciousness that reflects the tendencies or behaviors of whatever it is from a psychological perspective of a person. But it kind of again takes me back to Plato. I was just reading Timaeus to understand some of those things for another talk. And Plato kind of talks about this theory of forms, and where he kind of talks about this idealistic world that Rudyard calls as field of consciousness, and how it kind of attributes to the archetypal patterns or influences causing based on the astrological configurations. And he says that this is just more than purely something is material. So very quickly Plato kind of talks about the dual presence or this dual forms, and one is being and the other is becoming, and being has no change, or it doesn't really have a form. It is just there. It is an abstract view of what we have, but becoming is something very different. And this is where there is this beautiful unification of all these ancient philosophical ideas and also the modern ideas, where these astrologers bring in becoming, and becoming is something that everything that is present in the world as a matter that is subject to change. But still, what are the factors that actually cause the change, and what from a humanistic perspective, I think astrology is the path from being to becoming. So the idea is, how does the becoming change? And Ptolemy talks about this, and Plato talks about this. I think Aristotle also kind of talks about this in length, in saying that all that is matter or becoming is subject to change because of these elements. They don't talk about the fifth element very explicitly, and they talk about the four elements that we know. And Ptolemy says that this is one of those. This is an indescribable force, that is the fifth element, that brings about the existence of these four elements and causes an ambient. He says it is an ambient or the surroundings. And ambient, I think it is the circumstance, the land in which the person is living, and also the resources or the time that he or she has in the period that they live in. So, and all these kind of bring about changes in the matter or the person. And Ptolemy also says that it is, although he agrees with the idea of prediction, and there is some truth to it, and if we go back, all the astrologers kind of agree with the idea of prediction, although they are not 100% sure. But majority of astrologers kind of had this proportionately high, including Valens and Ptolemy and Firmicus Metanus and all those people. Somewhere down the line, they were a little dogmatic as well, but that is just my own perspective. But I think Ptolemy is very explicit in stating that there are some things that really cannot be predicted or not predicted with accuracy, because anything that walks this earth is subject to change because of these elements or the atmosphere that we live in. So the extent to which that we can do is always debatable, and I think that is something that both of you kind of brought up in a way which pretty much makes predeterminism as a questionable thing. So, and SJ, you spoke about the different kinds of karma, like what is changeable and what is not changeable. Without getting into the intricacies of it, I think there are things that are not changeable. For example, we cannot change our parents, we cannot change the place where we are born. But I think the essence of Vedic philosophy is again very similar to what Plato or Aristotle says is the path from being to becoming. So when there is this inherent, whatever it is that kind of causes change, we need to accept that when we make a prediction, we may actually go wrong. It's not that we will be sure, because Vedic philosophy calls this as karmic evolution, and karmic evolution is basically the choices that we make on a daily basis in our lives, and how do those choices impact our lives. And the moment we make a choice, we are kind of bound to a result. So and what we do after making that choice and in between the result period is something that kind of is called as the karmic evolution to some extent. And I think the scientific experiment that both of you kind of brought to was really interesting. which also kind of takes down to that root that although there is very little deviation in terms of how much a prediction can be made and how much it cannot be made, it has to be kind of acknowledged that there is a limit to which we can actually do it, both from ancient and modern ideas. So, and the idea of supporting free will and giving this empowerment to the modern man as a modern astrologer, I think is largely based on this idea of free will. But I think the ancient astrologers did not necessarily kind of present this as deterministic perspective. At least that is what I would say. I would think that they were primarily kind of influenced by the philosophy of their time, and during the 3rd or 4th century, Stoicism kind of really kind of took the center stage along with Neoplatonistic philosophy. So I think Stoics kind of had this tendency to not focus on the external environments or circumstances, but to focus only on the internal circumstance. And that is what pretty much the modern astrologers kind of try to develop or embellish. Like, how do we embellish and ornamentalize this internal environment in such a way that we are not largely affected by the external environment, or even if that external environment affects us, how do we kind of try and make this better? Because I was talking with Mark Jones again in previous episode, which is about the therapeutic applications of astrology. And there won't be a need of therapeutic application of astrology if there is no external circumstance that is basically affecting the internal circumstance. But I think the ancient astrologers in relation to the Stoic philosophy are primarily talking about how we really don't be affected by what is happening outside, and we just take control over of the inner self. So I think that kind of pretty much paints a little bit of a deterministic perspective, but I think fate is a little bit of a misunderstood concept as far as I see, both from Western and Eastern philosophy. Because if you go through Vedic philosophy, it's very clear that there is not a lot of fated extremely deterministic perspectives. There is determinism, but there is always scope for this karmic evolution, and that is the crux of why we are actually doing Vedic astrology, in order to study the evolution of the soul in relation to our karmic patterns. So I think that kind of pretty much sums up. And what took me to Plato is your mention of cosmos is a living being, and he clearly differentiates that being and becoming. So prediction, although it is an inherent possibility while we do an astrology, but there is always this proportion to which it works and does not work. But that doesn't mean that prediction really does not help. But that is only my perspective. And another thing SJ told in one of his videos, I think it's Saturn in Aries video, where he mentioned that Saturn in Pisces, or towards the end of Pisces, is basically the nature of crumbling realities. And when Saturn enters Aries, it is kind of, although it is fallen, there is this scope and also a little bit of a forceful circumstances or scenarios where we have to reconstruct or rebuild the realities, which could be external or also internal, which also kind of points out to the changes that we are all subject to as we are going through this human experience. So I don't know how far I made any sense with this, but I think the integrative synthesis of the archetypes of the Jungian philosophy or other modern psychological astrologers, and the idea of the process of being and becoming and transcending to this holistic lived experience is one of those important things that we can consider in terms of merging this traditional and modern versions of astrology. So
yeah, absolutely. I love hearing you say that about your perspective and from your lineage and the Vedic philosophy, and the way you were wording that, and how it's not predetermined that was really resonating with me, the way you were describing all of that, and also really fascinating to think about some of those ancient ideas. I agree with you there is something about, again, like going into that internal searching and awareness, and where that can lead us, that I think is really important. And there is something, we're always in these states of becoming, but then there is some sort of state of being that we can remember. I often think about that even with, I like to talk, when I talk about the technique secondary progressions, I like to think about it in terms of not just helping us see like what we're becoming in our story, but also remembering about our being in that kind of way at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll just add here, there's something about the ancient way they've thought about this stuff that I think relates to the Rudyardian model that you guys were talking about earlier. He has the idea of what planetization of consciousness, but basically it seems pretty consistent that the planets, as we measure them, are somehow connected to us, right? That there might not even be separation, that like we are stardust. You've heard that term. Like we're stardust, right? Somehow, some way. Now we might have different formulas that are different proportions of that stardust, and I think that's what the art of astrology is, at least how they thought about it even in the ancient world. Like you read Valens and Firmicus, and they're like, okay, there's this realm where God creates the planets, and that's like the setup for Earth, and then everybody's determined by the particular makeup of the planetary proportion or their map or their horoscope that is extant when they incarnate. But that's kind of the same idea, isn't it? That, I mean, I think philosophically that everybody's agreeing that we are of the planets, that somehow this planetary setup influences us one way or the other, whether it's psychological or literal. I think is set that aside here for a second. But that's very interesting to me, that we kind of all agree that somehow we are planetary, that the incarnation is planetary, and that there's a relationship between those movements and us and what's happening here. And that's the fundamental premise of astrology, isn't it? That that those movements do something. They're somehow, inextricably linked or directly connected to our unfoldment here. And the only other thing I wanted to say was, what's so cool about astrology, Aswin, you're talking about, and Gray, I forgot which one of you said this, but I always tell my clients, like, all right, you want to know about your seventh house? Well, hey, every year the sun's going to be there, Mercury and Venus are going to be there. Let's just see what, you get some activation. Like if you don't like what you have now, there's going to be some activation here at least once a year. And then let alone Jupiter every 12 years, eclipses every 9, Saturn we always get another chance. And so I don't think there is if you, I would say this, even like a paraplegic, with the technology that's coming online, I'm seeing videos now where people are getting hearing they've never heard in their lives, and new tech is allowing for hearing. I mean, that's the impossible becoming possible. What we would think is eliminated in terms of a fated outcome is actually now online. Yeah. But, setting aside those crazy fringe cases, I think we all can kind of co-create, you might say, as we engage areas of our charts every year on a regular basis. And it's never over. It's what I think one of you said earlier, I think Gray, Pasolini, the Italian filmmaker, has the same idea that the hero, you never know. There could be a hero the whole film. And he talks about it at the end of the life too, but basically, and in the last minute of the film, he could murder someone, and then it changes everything. It's a murderer. Yeah. It's not a hero. That's a murderer. And so you never know until the end. And that's the great promise of astrology. Hey, keep going, like keep working with the symbols of your chart, keep trying to figure this out, bring awareness to it, see if you can maneuver differently around it. And maybe it's predetermined, but maybe we're kind of changing our relationship to it, and that does something. To use like a Jeffrey Cornelius idea, because I think synchronicity is very much about awareness. Like we're bringing the light of beingness to questions, and that can change reality, So anyhow, just some other thoughts here. I know that's a little bit disconnected, maybe somehow to some of the things you were saying there, Aswin, but
it's clearly taking us into what, I had in my mind, but I missed it. So it is just that there is a lot of similarities that we are doing with both modern and ancient astrology. And ancient astrology is perceived to be focusing on fate and pinpoint predictions, and modern astrology is always considered to be focusing on the individual psyche or personal growth or some form of self-actualization or other fancy words that we want to use. But if we go back to Ptolemy has a specific chapter called Quality of the Soul. So, and also in the very, very initial chapters, Ptolemy talks about how a person, how an astrologer can make use of the temperaments and humors and properties of the signs and planets, and the elements are all there. So all these things will help in understanding the characteristic nature of an individual that we are looking at. So the idea of understanding the characteristic nature of a person is not as modern as most people think. It is not home to Jungian philosophy or any other modern philosophy, but it actually goes back to Ptolemy. And we need to acknowledge that a lot of these, even I'm pretty sure a lot of psychological stuff is going to help astrologers in becoming, a better version of astrologers. But I think Ptolemy is enough for us to kind of understand the inner self of a person, to understand where we are moving. And we also spoke about a little bit of determinism and all these things. But there is one thing that I wanted to touch upon is, before we end for today, is again Plato's symbolic nature or symbolism and Aristotle's causal theory. So the idea of whether planets actually cause or planets only indicate. So from a modern perspective, I think we look at the symbolic perspective or the archetypal perspective for the most part, but ancient astrologers, especially Ptolemy, actually thought that he tried to prove astrology from a causal perspective and that is the base that he used to prove astrology is an actual phenomenon that is almost close to science. So I don't know whether you believe that it is causal or it is symbolism, or is there a possibility to kind of bring both together as well in this front, because we understand that there is a lot of parallels, or maybe it's just the same when it comes to philosophical underpinnings. But what do you think about the causal and symbolic theory?
Yeah, I would say my practice really is rooted in the symbolic frame, but there is interesting things where there does seem to be natural cycles that are lined up with different cycles of planets and lunar cycles. There's a great book that Bruce Schofield wrote, The Nature of Astrology, getting into all of this, which I think is really fascinating, and a book everyone should look into more. And from that perspective, I think it is, and even someone like Jeffrey Cornelius, who I really value his questioning. When I've seen him interviewed and talk more, it's not like he's also at the same time invalidating the perspective that there could be some causal connections between, or is it just a correspondence, however this is working with the world soul between these different cycles and like weather patterns or movements of different organisms and changes. So I feel like there is more. I think there's something more mysterious and blending going on. But as far as my practice, I really work with it in terms of the symbolic and working with the symbolism and helping people really become aware of that. And if people are doing art around the symbolism or doing other ways to bring awareness in it, you'll see it just starts changing their relationship, and then their external life is changing also. Like it's just something that you see working with the symbolism in that way. So it's hard. There's something almost like we're in relation with it, however it's working, what's causing what, or what's yeah, I don't have a definitive answer for sure though.
I think it is very difficult to have a definitive answer as well, because as much as you kind of understand archetypal astrology, Richard Tarnas comes from this archetypal school of thought, but reading his cosmos and psyche and the planetary patterns and what they cause is not just the shift in the global consciousness, but it also kind of feels like there is something causal that is really happening. So I'll be curious to hear what SJ has to say, because he had to work with the planetary cycles and all those things with Dan Wade's.
Yeah, for me, and it's funny because in Chris's course, who's my primary teacher, I took his course a number of years ago and worked through it quite fast, and it was amazing that time when you're a young astrologer and you're learning all this stuff for the first time. So I think about that season of my career and practice fondly. But he asked this question on like one of the exams, in the course.
Yeah,
like,
I remember that too.
And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, I just never understood the question, to be honest, because I actually didn't see how it's kind of saying the same thing in my view. And I said that in my answer. I was like, because if the planets are causing, or if they're just a symbol of another cause, does it really matter? Because in both scenarios, the planets are directly linked to the events, whether they're the direct cause or the planets are like just the signal that's sent by the other thing that's the direct cause. And that other thing just uses the planets to communicate. And so I that was kind of how I wrote it in that response. I was like, either way, the planets are communicating it one way or the other. And so it felt kind of like inconsequential, the answer. Now, that was how I answered it then. My belief now is that I just feel like we're in a spiritual reality, okay? I mean, and I don't want to get too new age, but I mean, I believe that there's a spirit world and that this is just one material expression of existence, but there's these unseen realms. And these unseen realms are kind of where a lot of the action's happening. And I think the planets are part of the seen realm. I mean, they are like we look up and see them. Even the outer planets, it's telescopes observing them. So there is something about observed material phenomenon that the planets are of. But at the same time, they somehow connect us into these unseen realms as well, because you have synchronicity. That's why I like Jeffrey Cornelius's work too, because the definition of synchronicity is two things that shouldn't be connected, but then they are. And if you've ever done, and you guys have done readings, so there's stuff you see in readings. It's like, how is this happening? How did this happen? I see it almost every reading, or a lot. I just saw a person's chart and it was like, we were tracing the history of a certain part of their life, and it was all the big events happened exactly in these same tight degree ranges that were directly the first layer of symbolism of the question at hand, whether it was the house or the planetary ruler by domicile of the house. How did that happen? I mean, it's just like, I don't have an answer, but I know that it seems to be very much working, that we map this material event, the planets and their movement, and then that somehow gives us access. It's like a doorway in to some kind of mystery, you said, Gray. So I think that my view on that is we have to just go into the space of mystery. We have to kind of seek spiritually. And I think we need the religious and spiritual traditions. I think, and Robert Hand says this, if you try to use astrology and you don't have a spiritual backing, it's not going to work. Basically, something like that. I think he's more of like, if you're not doing inner work, or if you're not trying to like heal yourself or something, it doesn't seem to work as well. Rather people that are like, okay, show me the way, or they're trying to self-reflect, or outright on a spiritual path or something, it does tend to work better. And so let me just try to synthesize. I mean, what I'm saying, I think, is that I think we're held in some kind of way larger thing, and then we have this material embodiment, and this is what Firmicus and Valens say. They say God created the world. Even the Plato, he says, then the planets are the clock, the cosmic clock, that we then kind of descend into this realm through this planetary structure that is of the material. But all of those writings imply and point to the non-planetary reality. If you call it the pleroma, I think in some of the Gnostic worldviews, there's this other reality that is like comes before, and we come from that, and then we come into this. Something like that. I mean, I know I'm speaking very fast here. I mean, these are like huge topics and huge questions, and it's a whole conversation in and of itself. But that's how I see it. We transcend this question and really whether the planets cause or there's the other cause that the planets represent, like God or something, it's, that's more important.
It's
the
happening.
Transcendent.
Well, I really like how you bring up the unseen realm, and I think that is something that's going on with this, and how astrology somehow opens a door to this. And I think that's where, to me, also the consciousness coming in, and that it is a living symbolism, and that when you're really open to so there is a thing of like learning when we're talking about traditional astrology, I've really found a lot of value in being able to start engaging in all those texts and learning it, and getting a lot sharper with the foundational understanding of everything. But that doesn't mean like because somebody said something in 50 CE that like in one text that's the only thing that this planet can ever mean. It's the only way it's ever going to show up in a chart because this person said it 2,500 years ago or wrote it down from somewhere. That's just not reality, actually. And there is a thing that's not discounting the tradition either. There's really important guidance and meaning there, but there is something where you're engaging something does get opened up. And if it's, because I think when you're coming too much from that perspective, and if you're being really dogmatic of things can only mean certain things every single time, it's no longer alive. It's kind of dead, really. And when you're bringing that awareness that you're talking about, SJ, and how it opens things up, it does help guide you into those type of phenomena, that you're speaking of. And there is some kind of magical synchronicity or whatever happens in the space there, or that field of what insights or memories come up, or where things go from there by bringing that to this.
I think that is the ether. I always think the unseen
ether,
or indescribable force is the ether, which is the fifth element, which Ptolemy believes that kind of causes those unseen changes, or some form of a force that cannot be described. Be that as it may, cause and effect or symbolism, astrology is always subject to ridicule, because if it is cause and effect, the scientific community will question how come the planets that are million light years away from Earth can affect earthly beings. And if it is symbolism, and they'll say that you're just a fool to believe some form of an image that kind of conveys a message to you on Earth. So either way, it's up to us to kind of keep defending astrology, or just do whatever we do, and round up our conversation for today. And I think this was really eye-opening, and also a really multifaceted conversation where we spoke about a lot of philosophical aspects, and I never thought we would be able to cover this much ground, but I'm really happy we did. So where can people find your work, Gray, like your website and things?
My website's graycrawford.net. My name's spelled Gray. And you can find, if you go there, you can find all the things I'm doing. I do have a Patreon through there. You mentioned I have a YouTube channel also. And I usually update when I have courses coming up and things like that. Yeah, I do have you mentioned things that Zodiac are releasing earlier. I'm going to teach that for Kepler College in late October. But that's not up on the Kepler College website. But maybe by the time somebody's watching this, you might be able to find it there.
Good. That will go into the description page. SJ.
Yeah, I'm sjanderson144.com, and you can find me there. I'm a YouTuber, so I do publish pretty regularly on YouTube, and it's the same handle there at sjanderson144. And just come check me out. Look forward to seeing you. I like YouTube. I like making videos and sharing videos. I think it's a great way to engage the larger community, but also just people that are interested in astrology. Real quick, as a final point, I just want to say, so many people are interested in astrology. It to me, it kind of proves the validity of it, or the power of it. That as soon as you start talking about it, it's like moths to the flame. I mean, everybody has like an intuitive attraction to it. And even just sun sign astrology, at that layer, people, oh, what's my sign? And they want to talk about it. And I mean, I think there's something that when you have things like that, it does confirm that, there's smoke where there's smoke, there's fire kind of thing. There's like an intuitive draw to it. So anyhow, I don't want to get too launched in on that, but YouTube to me is a part of that, because you're sharing astrology. Even a podcast like this, I know it's a little bit more ISAR focused, so maybe it's a little bit more like astro enthusiast or practitioner types, but hopefully this can get out to the wider world too. If
the aim is to get to the wider world. So
Yeah.
Is it published on all the platforms? Is that
it is on YouTube?
It's on YouTube. Okay, so we're going to be in a video here. This will be on YouTube, a YouTube video. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Wow,
we are
I didn't
on
even
the
know
wider
that. Okay. I was kind of off in my own world here a little bit. I would have been a little bit more.
That's totally it. I've realized I should mention too, because I mentioned I was teaching that for Kepler College. If there's people listening and you're interested in learning ancient astrology, I've been coordinating. There's new Hellenistic astrology certificates that have been created through Kepler College, and the people teaching them are all really excellent practitioners who have this grounding in the tradition. And there's a natal certificate, and there's also a really cool timing certificate, which the zodiacal releasing is part of. We also have like decennials and circumambulations, a lot of these techniques that haven't been always put out there in courses, that if you're interested in that and want to get a certificate, you can check that out on the Kepler College website.
It's brilliant. So, I think it pretty much brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much, Gray and S.J. Anderson, for joining today. It was amazing, and I look forward to connecting with both of you for episode 2 to continue from where we left. This looks like a never-ending conversation, but I really enjoyed today, and I'm sure the viewers will also enjoy. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next time.